G'day guys, welcome to today's video review of 2020 Best Picture Academy Award nominee, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. We open on a black and white TV interview of classic TV Western actor Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his stunt double, Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. Rick is explaining the detailed process of behind the scenes of a big TV show star. We cut to upcoming starlet Sharon Tate, played by Margot Robbie, and her famous director husband Roman Polanski arriving in LA at the airport, while Cliff and Rick are driving to a meeting at a restaurant. Rick is meeting with movie producer Marvin Schwartz, played by Al Pacino. They're reminiscing about the days where Rick was a big movie star. One in particular, a World War II actioner called The 14 Fists of McCluskey, features Rick torching Nazis with a flamethrower. Rick tells him he trained with the flamethrower and kept it after the production ended. They then start talking about his big Western TV role on Bounty Law. Marvin then brings up how he only does TV guest spots nowadays playing the bad guy, and tells him that his days as the big star are over and his Hollywood career is on the decline, but suggests that Rick go to Italy and make spaghetti westerns and still play the hero leading man. Out in the car park, Rick nervously tells Cliff that he's now a has-been. He's frustrated and upset, and Cliff gets him in the car to take him home. We then get introduced to the girls from the Manson family. They're dumpster diving and dancing and singing. Cliff tells Rick that he's more of a gopher to him now than a stuntman, and that he really should consider going to Italy and starring in movies. The Manson girls cross the road in front of them, and one of them catches Cliff's eye. Cliff and Rick pull up in Rick's driveway and continue their conversation. Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski pull up as they've moved into the house next door. When Rick realises that famous director Roman Polanski is living next door, he gets excited again. Cliff leaves and goes back to his trailer home at the back of a drive-in. He plays with his dog and then gives him a bone, makes some dinner, drinks some beers, and then watches TV. Meanwhile, Rick is laying in his backyard swimming pool drinking. Roman and Sharon leave to go out to a party at the Playboy Mansion. At the party, Sharon is dancing around and loving life, as is everyone else there. Steve McQueen, played by Damian Lewis, explains to another partygoer how Sharon and Jay Sebrig, played by Emile Hirsch, were engaged, and they broke off the engagement and she married Roman, and now all three of them live together. We then cut to Sunday, February the 9th, 1969. Roman sits in his backyard drinking a coffee while Sharon's snoozing in bed. Cliff's driving Rick to the set of a Western TV show where he's going to play the bad guy again. He asks Cliff if he can fix his TV antenna at his house, and he leaves and says he'll pick him up at the end of the day. He asks Rick to check with the stunt coordinator and see if he'll be needed this week, and Rick tells him who the stunt coordinator is and says he won't be getting any work. Rick goes to makeup to prepare, and the director comes to see him. He has a different direction for Rick's character than usual and wants him to wear a wig and a mustache. On his way back to Rick's house, Cliff sees the Manson girl again out on the street, and they have a little flirt. He arrives at Rick's and jumps on the roof to fix the broken antenna. While standing on the roof, Cliff remembers back to what Rick said and flashes back to the original incident. Randy, the stunt coordinator, played by Kurt Russell, appears as Cliff is sitting outside Rick's trailer on the set of a show. He goes in to see Rick, and Rick begs him to use Cliff in the production and tells him the rumour that Cliff killed his own wife, and that's why no one wants to work with him. Randy reneges and lets Cliff suit up. The next scene is the much talked about fight between Bruce Lee and Cliff backstage on the set. Bruce is dressed as Kato, getting ready to film episodes of Green Hornet TV series, and is talking up his skills to the crew, saying that he'd be able to beat Muhammad Ali. Cliff can't help himself and challenges him, and they agree to have a fight, which is a draw, but Cliff gets booted off the set. We cut back and Cliff is still standing on the roof of Rick's house fixing his antenna. He sees a van appear in the street outside the house, and sees a long-haired guy walking up the drive towards Sharon and Roman's house. Cut to Sharon and Jay having lunch in the kitchen, and they see the same guy appear at their door. Jay goes out to confront him, and he says he's a friend of Terry's, the previous resident of the house. He asks where the current residents have gone, and Jay sends him away, but not before he's seen Sharon. This guy was Charles Manson, played by fellow Aussie Damien Herriman. Back on the set with Rick, he's now in hair, makeup and costume, and he goes to the set for his scene. He meets a young actress waiting for the shoot to begin, sitting reading a book in front of the set. She seems wise beyond her years. Rick sits next to her to read a book of his own, and when she asks him what's the book about, he tells her it's a cowboy story of a once great cowboy whose star has now faded. While telling her, he realises how much this mirrors his own life and career, and he starts to break down. Meanwhile, Sharon Tate drives into the city and goes and picks up a book for her husband. She then goes and watches herself at the cinema in the latest Dean Martin movie, where she has a bit part as the klutzy girl. The manager lets her into the cinema for free. Rick meets the star of the show that he's guesting on, James Stacey, played by Timothy Olyphant. He asks him about the rumour that he almost had the Steve McQueen part in The Great Escape, which Rick explains that he technically did pass on. He then shoots his first scene as the bad guy, in the saloon opposite James Stacey. During the crucial part of the dialogue, he stumbles over his lines a few times and they have to reset the shot. He goes back to his trailer and has a self-deprecating meltdown. Meanwhile, Cliff is driving down the street and comes across the Manson girl again. This time he decides to give her a lift. She comes onto him, but he turns her down as she's too young for him. He gives her a ride to Spawn Movie Ranch, where she lives with her friends. Cliff knows where it is, as he used to make TV shows there 8 years ago. Cut back to Rick, and he's about to do his bad guy confrontation scene opposite the late great Luke Perry. And it features the young girl that he spoke with earlier. There's a determination in Rick's eyes, and he delivers a blistering, flawless performance. At the conclusion of the scene, the girl whispers to him, "That was the best acting I've ever seen in my whole life." And Rick cries with relief. Back at the Spawn Movie Ranch, and Cliff approaches with the hippie girl. The ranch is overrun with young hippies. Cliff knows the owner and finds it hard to believe that he's allowing them full access to his property. He meets Tex, who seems to be in charge while Charlie Manson is away. Cliff goes to see the owner, George Spawn, played by Bruce Dern, who is an old and blind man, and he's getting looked after, in more ways than one, from one of the hippie chicks, Squeaky Fromm, played by Dakota Fanning. The hippies, or Manson family, run horse trails to tourists to make money, and George says it all has his approval and for Cliff to go away. When Cliff gets back to his car, someone has punctured the tyre. He beats him up and makes him fix the wheel, and in doing so doesn't make any friends of the Manson clan. Cliff leaves, but is suspicious. Cliff picks up Rick from the set and takes him home. They eat pizza and drink beer and watch Rick on TV. Cliff tells him that he bought an acid-dipped cigarette and wants to take it at Rick sometime, so he'll leave it there. Marvin Schwartz is also watching the same TV shows and calls Sergio Carbucci and tells him that Rick is his man for his next spaghetti western. It now cuts to 6 months later, Friday, August the 8th, 1969. Rick is on a Pan Am flight back from Italy. He now has longer hair and sideburns. Suddenly, a voiceover from Kurt Russell kicks in, explaining what happened in the past 6 months. Rick starred in a movie and hooked up with his Italian co-star, Francesca, who he married. He also did 3 other movies while he was in Italy. Cliff's been with him the whole time, but once they get home, Rick tells Cliff that he can't afford to keep him anymore. Tonight will be their last night together, so they're going to have a blowout at Rick's. We cut to next door, and Sharon Tate is now pregnant. Her sister comes over to visit. The voiceover from Kurt Russell kicks in again, saying who was living at Sharon's, and where they were, and when they all went to dinner, and what time they came home. Cliff and Rick go out to a restaurant for dinner and drinks, while Francesca is at home in bed, getting over a jet lag. They get a cab back to Rick's because they're so drunk. When they get home, Rick starts making margaritas, while Cliff decides he's going to smoke his acid joint and takes his dog for a walk. At this time, the Manson family hippies rock up in their bomb of a car. Rick hears them and goes out into the street and tells them in no certain terms to leave. The hippies move the car and park it around the corner, where they sit and discuss how they've been instructed by Charles Manson to go to Terry's old house and kill everyone. They also trip out on the fact that Rick Dalton just yelled at them and told them to leave. One of the four takes the car and bolts, and the other three decide to go ahead with the murders. Cliff gets back to Rick's after walking his dog, and he's now tripping hard on acid. Rick is out the back, floating in the pool, drinking and listening to music on headphones. Meanwhile, the Manson family hippies go to the wrong house and walk into Rick's lounge, to be immediately confronted by the tripping Cliff and his dog. Then, in a classic, brutal, comical, graphic, typical Tarantino violent scene, Cliff and his dog dispatch of two of the hippies. Cliff is injured in this struggle and passes out. The third hippie, after being attacked by the dog, runs screaming into the backyard and into the swimming pool. Rick goes into the pool house and pulls out his flamethrower and tortures the hippie. The police arrive and interview Rick and Cliff while he's receiving medical treatment. As Cliff leaves in the ambulance, Rick meets Jay, who's come to the gate to see what's going on. Sharon comes on the intercom and invites him to come up to the house. The movie ends with Rick walking up the driveway with Jay towards the house to meet Sharon and her friends, all happy and alive, unlike in real life. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood feels like one 2-hour movie and then a separate 45-minute movie with the same characters. The first 2 hours of the film, The Adventures of Rick and Cliff in 60s Hollywood, is fantastic. It really is a love letter to Hollywood at that period of time, and the story of a fading star and his stuntman at the dawn of a new age of cinema was compelling enough in itself. The acting performances of Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio are mesmerising to watch, and the chemistry between the two is instant and believable. Up to this point, it feels like Quentin Tarantino's most mature movie. It had his usual witty dialogue, interesting exposition scenes, and not only his usual cast of quality actors, but many cameos and recognisable faces. At this point, I thought we might even get through a whole Quentin movie without any hardcore graphic violence. But at the 2-hour mark, it felt like Quentin had been so immersed in the nostalgia of the setting that he'd forgotten that he had to tell a story and an ending. And considering the genesis of the movie was to make a retelling of history with the Manson family murders, the movie suddenly changed gear with a bizarrely out of place and out of nowhere voiceover, strangely from Kurt Russell, about the facts and time and details of the setting for the murder of Sharon Tate and her friends on that fateful day. Speaking of that, it also felt like a lot of the Manson side of the story had been cut out for the sake of the great scenes for The Adventures of Rick and Cliff. I was surprised that Damien Herriman only appeared as Charles Manson in one brief scene at the start. And even though my other fellow countryman Margot Robbie was excellent in portraying the lovely innocence and joy for life of Sharon Tate, I felt as though when Quentin rewrote history with Inglourious Basterds by killing Hitler, or Django Unchained by killing white slavers, I thought these were more universal or global themes and events that people could identify with. Although I'm aware of the Manson murders of the 60s, I'm sure that it means a lot more to people that were alive in that era and also people that live in LA or even the USA. To watch 3 young people, 2 of them women, be brutally killed by the 2 main characters. Having said all that, Quentin is a great filmmaker, and this was almost his best, most mature effort. I still don't think it was better than Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction, or my personal favourite, Jackie Brown. I still think it's an excellent movie and definitely worth watching if you love cinema, the 60s, great acting, dialogue and scenes, or just Quentin Tarantino movies in general. So my rating for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is 7.5 out of 10 stars. Thanks for watching today's video, guys. If you enjoyed the content, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Feel free to check out one of my other videos on my channel while you're here. Have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take it easy.